Morning, everybody, and welcome to this extremely raining Thursday morning webinar. My name is Chloe. I am the health coach here with Ready Care. For this morning, we're going to be looking at the topic of metabolic mental health. So we're segueing back into health after our month of primarily internal, mental support talks. For today, it's going to be more into the metabolic health framework than it's been for a while, excuse me. So there is a really exciting emerging field in psychiatry that's shifting the current paradigm of how we would think about mental illness. So not just this kind of disorder that is just down to chemical imbalance, brain imbalances that are kind of question mark umbrella terms for something's happening in there that we're not too sure what it is, which is the previous paradigm. And here is the pharmacological psychiatric way to rebalance some of those disbalances, unbalances, imbalances, every word there in there. So there is a really, really exciting new field, as I mentioned, called metabolic psychiatry. It's an absolutely brilliant book I'm looking at here called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And it is by Dr. Georgia Ede, whose name I will just write down here. And Dr. Georgia Ede was recently on Diary of a CEO, which is where I saw her work most recently and her speak about her work. She's absolutely phenomenal speaker on all of this, really great career in psychiatry, and just through her own playing around with her own diet, discovered certain things and then played out with it with regards, adapting it into her practice and trained up in metabolic psychiatry. So what it is, if we're to kind of look at it zooming out, it's a field that's all about the rigorous science that's uncovering how systems that are tied to our metabolic health, right? Things that I would speak about here constantly, unless it's the month of October where I've been speaking largely about internal mental processes. But by and large, an awful lot of the talks that I cover here in our morning webinars are to do with different facets of metabolic health and the symptoms that come up with it. So the most familiar one, and if you've got your bingo sheets at the ready, here we go. Type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cholesterol, blood pressure, difficulty losing weight, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and sleep apnea, to name but a few. Then when we're moving more into the psychiatric or mental health aspect of it, things like dementia, Alzheimer's, and more evidence, because you've to remember, because this is an emerging field, there's not as much literature on it. Now, that's not to say that the literature and the outcomes that do exist aren't exceedingly promising, and I'll speak about some of them in a while. But it's just worth bearing in mind that with any new emerging field, the literature there isn't as, there's not as much of it. Now, there is an awful lot being done and lots of studies being done. But in terms of some absolutely fantastic outcomes with metabolic mind approaches to food and diet as a way to let food be thy medicine on a psychiatric and mental health capacity, there's absolutely outstanding outcomes for anxiety, depression, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other studies with regards autism as well. So it is growing. It's a growing subspecialty that addresses how our dysfunctions in our metabolic systems, like the insulin resistance that I talk about all the time, like the mitochondrial issues that happen as a byproduct of it, and that chronic inflammation, how they all contribute to mental illnesses. Now, Dr. Georgia Ede speaks about in that Diary of a CEO the chemical imbalances that and I said it there, was an umbrella term. And she started asking the questions of, what are these chemical imbalances? Why are we just saying that and stopping the investigation there? What else is happening? And surely if we're always dealing with the symptom and not the root cause, she commented that herself and her colleagues were treating people for an awful long time, and they just simply were not getting better. And they were going through all the psychotherapeutic looking at people's families, their history, their traumas, this, that, and the other. But the fundamentals of the characteristic positive and negative symptoms of the likes of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, to name two of them specifically, they weren't really going away. And when I say positive and negative, I don't just mean good and bad. I mean, when individuals experience things like auditory or visual hallucinations, things that add to their reality, things that shouldn't quite be there, but they are, that's thought of as a positive symptom. And when things are lacking that should be there in a quote unquote normal person, when these things aren't present, things like, ability to cope with a regular threshold of tolerance for your everyday tasks, for example, that could be seen as, a lack of specific things that should be there. So looking at all of these, right, while psychiatry had traditionally focused on neurotransmitters and medication solely, the shift to metabolic approaches looks at the entire system, because there is a trend in Western medicine, more specifically, like in all medicine, but less so in some of the Eastern practices, where we have specialized fields. So we have cardiologists, we have, eye doctors, opticians. There you go. The word escaped me there for a second. We have people that are endocrinologists. We have people that specialize specifically in all these different systems. And if we were to transpose this way of thinking to other fields, it's very difficult to see how it wouldn't become myopic after a while. So, to use my analogy that I can never back up because my car knowledge is absolutely terrible, so if I'm making a hames of it, please let me know. You have a mechanic, you don't have an engine doctor, a lights doctor, a this doctor, a that doctor. Now, where that can be fantastic, because all human beings have a cutoff point for what they can know in a specific lifetime. So to have an expert is not the problem. To have an expert that knows next to nothing in everything else that's connected to the organ that they're looking after is problematic. To use another terrible analogy, I don't know where I'm going with these half the time, so I apologize. If you had somebody who had severe gout and they kept going to a therapist talking about their inability to get out of bed with no context, it could be seen as awful depression, but what's wrong with them is their foot's not working. They physically can't get out of bed. So bad analogy, but just to drive the point home a little bit more, the key difference with the metabolic psychiatry is that it takes in all aspects of the body. And you've clinicians like Dr. Shabani Sethi of Stanford, so Shebani, coined the term after seeing patients with chronic depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, often have underlying metabolic problems like the prediabetes, obesity, high inflammation. Now, where things get really interesting is that, if you remember rightly from a few different talks that I've done and from Google searches, if you want a second and third and fourth opinion, most of the population has metabolic problems. So staggeringly, by following the healthy eating guidelines, up to 70% of UK and Ireland's population have metabolic conditions, which is really what a coincidence. So it's worth bearing in mind that most of us, if we're not tailoring the diet, our diets, excuse me, ever so slightly, we are very much predisposed to having metabolic problems, which, going by Dr. Sethi of Stanford's research, predisposes us for a range of mental health difficulties. And you can see that the rise in mental health. Now, I know that, there's not one underlying mechanism for all of mental health, and I don't want to be reductive and saying everything is down to metabolic health, because somebody else who specializes in something else will say everything is down to that. They'll say it's all down to food equity. It's all down to the gap in pay wage, which, I mean, all these things are true. That's the funny thing about humans is I think we've this idea that only one version of things can be correct, and it's very difficult for us to hold things happening simultaneously. So, how the body affects the brain. And we look at the three main biological systems that are affected. Is you have your blood sugar and your insulin resistance. So that's the biggie. That's the one we're always trying to avoid, because oftentimes it can be linked back to an awful lot of conditions that we want to avoid, cardiovascular disease being the main one. Cholesterol gets blamed an awful lot, and there's an awful lot of attention given to cholesterol. But having diabetes places you at a tenfold risk of cardiovascular disease. So really getting your insulin managed is key if you're looking to avoid your life getting shorter. Avoid what, says she. So the brain runs primarily on glucose, and when insulin, which is your hormone that helps cells use glucose, when that becomes less effective, brain cells can experience an energy shortfall. So studies show that insulin resistance doubles the risk of depression, even in otherwise healthy adults. And I see this an awful lot with people who come as a client for more kind of quote unquote medical markers, things like the conditions I mentioned, type 2, etc., etc. So they will often say that their energy is quite rubbish, their energy is quite poor. They're not really getting the energy that they should from the glucose, because the glucose is causing problems. The glucose is causing the rise in insulin, and it's kind of adding to the merry-go-round of things getting a little bit worse. I liken it to trying to fill a metal bucket with acid and saying, why can I never get it to the top? So 1 in 3 adults has insulin resistance, and I would say that figure is probably a little bit outdated. So you have a very significant overlap with rising states of anxiety and depression. Now, the second one is mitochondria and brain energy, which is quite similar to the first one. Oop, hands are back in action. I can speak again. Mitochondria, as we remember from school, is the powerhouse of your cells. So they're the energy producers inside our cells. When there's dysfunctional mitochondria, it's been implicated in mood disorders like depression, bipolar disorder. And there's a nifty paper from 2021 in Frontiers in Psychiatry that looks at mitochondrial dysfunction and mood disorders. So basically, to put it simply, if your neurons don't get energy that they need, you get symptoms like brain fog, low motivation, and emotional instability. And if you have that long term, right, if you have poor motivation, difficulty concentrating, your emotions are a little bit all over the place, we all attach stories. We try to look for reasons why these things are happening. That's also the human condition. We usually put a story on things after the fact. So we feel something and we go, I wonder why I feel that. I'm going to need a reason, because things have to be logical. Otherwise, my whole world is going to fall apart. So we attach little stories onto how we feel. So you can see how over time, something where you feel rubbish, where you actually physically do not feel good, can become enmeshed with the physiological symptoms of having mood disorders, and also the psychological symptoms made worse by the likes of rumination. So rumination is essentially when we have a negative thought or feeling, get it, comes into our system, it can leave, or we can keep it there, and we can keep it rattling. And every time we rethink the thought, it's going to make us feel even deeper and weirder and worse into that thought. So the third one is chronic inflammation. So chronic low-grade inflammation has been linked to depression, fatigue, and cognitive dulling. So roughly about 25 to 50% of people with major depression show elevated inflammatory markers. So inflammatory markers are cytokines, another way to call them. They can disrupt neurotransmitters and they reduce what's called neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to reshape itself, to learn new things, to break out of old molds. So if you've got that chronic inflammation happening, your system's overheated, your system's not doing great. I think of it in terms of pictures, like it's red, it's grating, it's like, so it reduces your brain's basic ability to adapt and heal. So can you change all that? It's like, okay, Chloe, horror story gone in, but can you change it? You absolutely can. So the most important thing is if we improve metabolic function, can we improve mental health outcomes? Spoiler alert, based on the 3 factors I've just said, yes, very, 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 very much so you can. I'll give you 2 examples of studies that have done that, and I'll wrap it up so that I'm not chatting on forever and a day. And if you've questions, please pop them in as always. So the SMILES trials, SMILES, SMILES trial in 2017, which was a landmark randomized control trial in Australia. It tested a low carbohydrate, not ketogenic, low carbohydrate diet in adults with major depression. And after 12 weeks, 32% of participants in the diet, doggone, absolutely haywire. That's what I was afraid of. 32% of participants in the diet group actually achieved full remission of depression symptoms. That's a third, right? So 12 weeks, a third of people with major depression. So major depression would be qualified by huge disruption to your life, disruption to your relationships, your work, your this, your whatever, unable to function what would be called a normal threshold of tolerance. And only 8% of the control group, so of those that undertook the dietary changes with no other changes to be seen, a third full remission, 12 weeks, full remission of depression symptoms. Now, for those of us that have ever suffered from depressive symptoms or major depressive symptoms, to even think of a life with full remission is incredible, absolutely incredible. So just tweaking diets ever so slightly can do that. The other one that I'll touch on briefly before I wrap up is the ketogenic diet for severe mental illness. Now, this is an absolutely incredible study. It's 2023 Stanford pilot study with 21 patients with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. All of them were already on antipsychotic medication and all of them had metabolic syndrome. So 100% reversed their metabolic syndrome by the end of the study. So let me check. Do I have how long the study was? I don't. And on average, patients saw a 31% improvement in psychiatric symptom severity. Now, to put this into perspective, that is far, 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 far greater results and outcomes than any pharmacological intervention. There is a bipolar alone, and I don't have it in my notes here, but if you want to look it up afterwards, or if those are any of you are interested, just send me an email. I'll just pop up my email there again. There is a bipolar study. Now, bipolar used to go by the name, manic depression. There we go. It used to go by that name, but I don't think it just goes by bipolar. Now, I could be wrong in my naming of this now. So this is my email. If you or anyone you know is affected and wants more information, give me a shout. Because I should have it on my back in the back catalogue. But basically it was a bipolar study done with a strict ketogenic diet. Now that's slightly different. A strict ketogenic diet eliminates almost, well, actually all carbohydrates. So low carb would eliminate or reduce things like the grains, things I chat about quite a bit. So you have your rice, pasta, banana, apples, grapes, pears, potatoes, bread, porridge, right? They're the biggies that you really, really reduce. Eliminate them if you can, but reduce them. And anything under 100 grams of carbohydrates is considered low carb. A ketogenic diet done properly, which is a big caveat, done properly, is 20 grams. So it's a lot stricter. It was originally used for managing epilepsy because it's absolutely outstanding at doing that. So there's a huge link with the brain where the ketogenic diet is concerned. But there was a study done, and I don't have the details, but I will get them to anybody who sends me that, or if they want to have a look, because for whatever reason I just brought in the wrong notes for today, so my apologies. But there was 100% success in all participants on this ketogenic diet, finding that their symptoms got better, right? So better is a fluid, it's a fluid way of looking at this. And I think they had some breakdowns and markers, score yourself 1 to 10 and how do you feel afterwards, but all of them felt better afterwards. And I want to say that some of them came off medication, but I'm going to have to double check that. I'm almost positive that they did, which is absolutely incredible. Because again, if you or anyone you know has bipolar disorder, it can be an incredible lonely journey. It can be a very difficult condition to manage the ups and downs, and the medication itself, which of course is useful when it is useful. There are a number of side effects that individuals can struggle with. So if there is a support and a complementary way of looking after it, why not give it a go? So to summarize, so how do you recognize if you have metabolic mental health patterning? So common clues would be things like mental fatigue, brain fog that worsens after high carbohydrate meals. If you get sleepy after a high carbohydrate meal, that's usually a good indication that your metabolic health isn't exactly where you want it to be. People talk about brain fog quite a bit. There are specific instances where it's a little bit more normal than usual. If you've just had a baby, if you're going through the menopause, if you're having a very stressful period. So having mental fatigue in and of itself might not mean that you have metabolic difficulties, but if it's something that you're noticing doesn't ever seem to go away, it doesn't ever seem to really go away. No matter how much sleep you get and how much you look after yourself, it doesn't quite go. So that could be a sign for you. Mood instability along with weight gain or high blood pressure. High triglycerides in your cholesterol readings. That's your third component part. TG is what they're written in your blood work. Anxiety and low mood that improves with physical movement or diet change. Right, that's the last thing you want to do when you don't feel good, and I appreciate that. But if you notice that times that you do exercise, your anxiety tends to get a little bit better, that can sometimes be a teller. And lab indicators like insulin resistance or elevated CRP levels, they can all show you. And if your blood sugars are high, if you've got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and all the rest of the lovely conditions I mentioned, they're usually a huge teller that there is something going on with your metabolism. So what can you do? Hit it with the diet. So whole food, low processed, anti-inflammatory foods, the closest to their natural form that you can get them. So that's good quality meats. Do not fear red meat. Have a look at those studies being debunked, because we hear all about the things that kill us and sell papers and headlines, but never the things that debunk them shortly afterwards. Good quality red meat. We're very blessed in Ireland with some of the best beef in the world. Eggs, dairy products, do not worry about higher fat. You won't put weight on from having, an egg or a good cut of meat. you're more likely to put weight on from eating lots of potatoes, rice, pastas, carbohydrates, bananas, porridge, and all of the other foods that get shoved down our throat on a constant basis. Movement, regular exercise will enhance your mitochondrial health and reduce depression risk. You don't have to sign up to a marathon unless you want to, and if that's the case, off you go, off with you. Any small movement is better than none, which is something I have to remind myself of sometimes. Any movement is better than none. If you throw on some music while you do a bit of cleaning, get yourself dancing. If you actually can't face the mere thought of that at all, but you say, look, I'll throw on a 10-minute YouTube video of very, very, very gentle stretching. I'll throw on a YouTube video of something mental that I enjoyed doing a few years ago, and I'll do it for 5 minutes or until I absolutely can't do it anymore. Taking the dog for a walk, which God love him. I should probably do that shortly. But any movement is better than none. Blood sugar stability is massive. So that comes right back down to your balanced meals. That's going to support your mood by avoiding glucose crashes. Now you might say, Chloe, if I have a glucose crash, is it not better to eat loads of glucose? That's a very short term. That's a short term yes. Yes, if you want to continue getting your glucose up and getting further crashes. And with that high glucose, remember that's going to get all the insulin pumping, which is going to absolutely destroy your metabolic health. You can absolutely go for a high sugar thing to get that glucose crash back up again. You're just keeping yourself on the loop doing it that way. So a better option is making sure you don't have a spike in the first place. The harder you rise, the harder you fall. So keeping it at a level, your energy is going to thank you for it. Because people don't really get a huge amount of energy. They might get hyper for like 10 seconds or 10 minutes, I should say, not 10 seconds. But there's a crash shortly after. So blood sugar stability from good fats, good proteins, all above ground vegetables, happy days with the berries and the low sugar type fruit, nuts, seeds, yogurt, all these kind of things are absolutely perfect. Now, and if you think that you might have some difficulty there, reach out to your doctor if you'd like to, just to get it checked. There's lots of brilliant videos out there. I really, really recommend Georgia Eid. I think she's fabulous and she's approachable. An awful lot of people in the metabolic health sphere are actually mostly just talking for other professionals. And that means that everybody's trying to sound very intelligent for other professionals. And they forget that the average person on the street doesn't know or need to know like your gene expression, this, that, and the other. I mean, if you do, happy days. But Georgia Eid she gets her point across. She gives the proper scientific terminology. She doesn't water it down, but she will always give a very approachable my metabolic brain do as I say, not as I do. She'll give a very good descriptor for it. And I actually really like your man, Stephen Bartlett. He's very curious, very naturally curious, and has no problem admitting when he doesn't know something, which I think is a lovely trait in an interviewer. So her interview is brilliant with him. So I hope you found this helpful. And questions, comments, as always, I love to get them. And thank you for those who commented previously. It's nice to know that people are listening and hearing. So have a lovely rest of your day, guys, and we will chat to you next week, and happy Halloween. And don't worry about having 1 or 2 bits trick or treats around Halloween. Far be it from me to tell you not to participate in age-old traditions like our good old Samhain. But anyway, have a nice rest of your day, and we'll chat to you next time. Bye now.